Welcome back again, everyone. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you watched part 1 of the video. This is part 2. I'll see how long it ends up running. If it goes to 3 parts, I don't know. Maybe nobody wants 3 parts of how to detail a diesel. But I think I got some of the issues resolved with the 0402s. One thing I want to point out too, in the last video, I started by calling the LEDs 0603s when in fact they're 0402s. And for those wondering, that's actually the dimensions on the parts themselves. 0603 refers to 0.06 inches by 0.03 inches, so 0603. 0402 is 0.04 by 0.02. So these are tiny, tiny parts. You know, they're getting smaller and they're getting smaller, and that's not actually the smallest. If you ever crack open a cell phone, you'll see even tinier. But for our purposes, they work pretty great, and you can now stick LEDs virtually anywhere, which is really nice. The hardest part is working with them, though. They are small, and soldering to them can be a pain. And like I said, that's why I buy the pre-soldered on leads. Let someone with a nice big magnifying glass and good steady hands solder that wire to those. So let's get right to it. Nothing real new to show off this week, so right into the video and cut into what we were working on, or what I'm working on, what you're watching me work on. I guess that's how it goes, right? Alright, well, anyway, let's watch me work. Okay, I'm finding this project can be a little difficult to show as I'm doing things. The camera doesn't zoom real well and then focus on what I'm working on. So I'm doing things and then kind of having to show you the end result. So here's the headlight. Now the casting itself painted, and you can see that you really can't see behind the casting at all. But it's still good that the part I filed away is painted yellow, or the maroon rather. And so what you can see here is I've modified that Kato light pipe, and now both, is it focusing? There we go, maybe that'll get you. The light pipe is now in place, and so you can see I just push it back in and I drilled holes. But now what I like about it is it actually looks like there's lenses inside here. So then what I'm going to do is, if you can see it in there, right inside there, there's the light pipe itself. It's a little off kilter at the moment, but we'll glue that in place. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and glue one of the 0402 LEDs directly to this, and I'm going to paint this whole thing black to help prevent light bleed. It doesn't completely mask it out, but it does help somewhat. And being that it's going to be a nose mounted, hopefully that won't bleed into the cab itself, like you sometimes get when they're mounted above the cab. But so that's that. Especially with Wisconsin Central, I know a lot of railroads do this, but the step edges will be painted white. And you can get decal sets that you can apply the decals to the edges of those. My hands aren't steady enough, and to me that's just tedious, and I have little luck. So by all means you can try that. However, what I like to do is just take a toothpick, this one you can see I've used before, and basically kind of turn it into a ballpoint pen of sorts. Dip it in the paint, or put some paint on a paint tray, dip it, and then you basically just take the edge and go along and do the edges of the steps. Now you want to minimize how much paint you have on the toothpick, because you will get a lot of bleed over, and then it looks bad and it can be hard to clean up and everything. So what I like to do is start at the bottom, you know, get a good one going, you know. Now it's not going to be perfect. You can't get exactly right to the edge where the step meets the wall here, but for all intents and purposes, I think it does a good enough job. It makes the steps stand out a little bit. You get that white edge, prototypical I also use the toothpick for painting the handrails. With this particular kit, Kato thankfully has molded the handrails in color instead of in black, and I know that there's a lot of good paints out there, especially like RC model paints, that are a little bit more flexible. They're made for the RC car bodies, and which also get a lot of abuse when the cars flip and run into things. So they take the flexing of the plastic, and I want to say Tamiya may make one of those, but if not, if you go into your hobby shop and look at their RC color section, any of those paints, and the great thing is that for handrail ends, usually we can get by with a white or a yellow, and not any railroad specific color. But I'll do the same thing with the toothpick. Instead of using a paintbrush, I'll just use the toothpick along the handrail, and again, it's almost like a paint marker of sorts. But I just find that sometimes the brush leaves a fat, thicker paint bead on there, so you find yourself just working the paint more. This just kind of comes in and applies it, gently, and you got to keep dipping and coming back. Yeah, it takes some practice, but I like the results. So give it a try. Worth a try if nothing else. So you can see I've just got a little bit of white paint on the end of my toothpick, and I'll come in, and there you go. The edge of the step is painted white. Now I'll work my way up the steps, rotate it around, and do the other sides. Let's see if I can get the detail, but there you go. So you can see I have all the steps painted, the step edge is painted white, and then in particular this is what Wisconsin Central did with theirs. They painted them white. Sometimes they're yellow, but Wisconsin Central did white. So pretty quick and easy. Again, you could use the decals. There are decal sets that include these. I just like using this method. So one of the things I do when I paint the handrails, especially with these pre-painted ones, and even when they're unpainted, a lot of times I'll leave the handrails on the sprue like this. It makes it easy, gives you some place to hold. These will blow around real easy with the airbrush, so I'll just leave them on here. What I like about, I think I showed these in a previous video, is as I picked up this pair of Xuron sprue cutters, and what's great about these is you get a real nice clean cut. You don't have to do as much filing, which works out real well for the ends of the handrails here. So what I did here, there was a piece here, so I cut it and then I trimmed this piece off that had the sprue here, and that leaves this kind of suspended out in the open, and I can easily paint this. And again, I don't have to worry about trying to handle it and stuff like that. It gives you a little bit more stock to work with, if you will. So we'll take my toothpick again, and this time you can get a little bit more paint on it because it's not as fine a work, and you just come through and need a little bit more paint than that, I guess. Okay, so here's the end result. As you can see, hopefully my hand is providing a little contrast, but I've got the handrails painted, the safety colors on the end, and got all the end rails and then the cab rails and stuff like that. So the toothpick makes quick work of it. And the one thing I will suggest is that you use the thinner your paint for handrails, the better. It spreads the coat a little bit thinner, and it doesn't glob up like in these corners here or around, like right where the bends are. If it's too heavy, you'll get a glob in there, and then you're picking at it and trying to spread it and stuff like that. So if the paint is a little bit thinner, it seems to help. So can't say if that helps in the long run with flexibility with the handrails or not. But in this case, I happen to just use a Reefer White by Polyscale. Nothing real special there. So I would like to get a hold of some of that RC paint, like I mentioned, just to see for future reference. But for now, that's the handrails. Okay, so another frame modification, and this is again one of the things that Kato doesn't really, at least on this particular model, maybe their newer ones, the plows are added. However, for this particular unit, there was Wisconsin Central had a snow plow on the front, and not on the rear, but on the front at least. On the rear, actually, there's these molded in steps, and I'm not sure what exactly they're called, but you know, where the MU cables and stuff would be held. There's slots here. On the actual unit, this was flush. However, I'm going to go ahead and leave that, because if I trim it, I'm going to be left with a real rough edge that's going to be hard, especially with black, to cover up. So a little unprototypical, but I'm going to leave that on the back side. On the front side, however, I'm going to need to remove this in order to make room for the snowplow. So I'm just going to go ahead and use my razor saw and slowly work off this part, then file it down, drill some holes, mark, and then drill some holes for the snowplow. So that'll be the next step. Nothing real complicated to this. I usually just line the saw up with the pilot here. I'm trying to get as close as I can. That'll reduce the amount of filing that I'll need to do once I've got the cut made. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this off and start marking. Not the cleanest cut in the world, but I'll come back, sand that off, and again, it's going to be hidden by the snowplow. So as long as it's flush and the snowplow can sit properly, it's not ultra important how this looks underneath it all, because again, the plow is going to go over the top of it, so you really aren't going to see it anyway. But I'll file it down anyway, make sure it's a nice flat surface, and then mark some holes and drill them for the plow. Detail Associates, when they sell their plows, usually there is a template that comes with them. Unfortunately, I bought this plow for a different project and decided not to use it, so I don't have the template anymore. So I'm just going to go ahead and, I guess, wing it a little bit. But the plow generally sits flush. Now, you'll want to line it up such that the underside or the top side of the plow here lines up with the underside of the coupler box opening. And the other way you can do it is to just lay both flat on the workbench, and that's going to give you a pretty good idea of where it should be. And then you can mark with a pencil or sharp, nice fine-tipped Sharpie, things like that, to get the markings. And then drill your holes. And I usually drill them undersized so I can press fit it in so it fits snug, and then glue it, of course, once you're done. So there you go. I know I skipped ahead a little bit there. I just used my handheld screwdriver or drill, and size this just a little bit under. The lugs on the back of the snowplow are slightly tapered, so you can go a little underside, and as you press them in, it'll fit snugly. And this isn't even glued in, but she's in there pretty good. So I'll go ahead and probably just apply a little bit of super glue on the back side once I'm confident that it's in the right spot. The hardest part of this now is trying to, if you want to do go realistic, and I always like the look, is when the MU cables come out the holes of the snowplow and they're draped across the front of the snowplow. That's a little bit more difficult to do with the Kato MU cables though, because they're not real flexible. So it's going to be a hit or miss proposition. If you go with an aftermarket like a Detail Associates, one of their metal castings, that works out really well because they're very pliable. They're somewhat brittle. You don't get a ton of working you know, if you bend them too much, they're going to break. But then you can kind of bend them so they look draped over the top of the snowplow. So that's the snowplow. Okay, good news. I figured out what I was doing wrong with the enamel coated wire. Basically, I just wasn't holding it under heat long enough. I guess previous LEDs that I used from a different manufacturer, the enamel burned off a lot easier. So when I held it under the flame this time and it didn't burn off right away, I thought I'd done something wrong. So good news there. So the most important thing, the smaller the LEDs get, well, any LED needs to be protected by a resistor. And you're going to want to check any decoder that you buy to see if they have any resistors on the headlight or functions, and if they do, what the resistance value is. The decoder that I'm using for this particular project is a Digitrax DH165KO. It's basically their standard DH165. It just happens to have pads in place for Kato's LED locations. If you want to use their, you can transplant the LEDs off of their LED board that it comes with, and then you can put them in place on the decoder itself. And I'll show you this in a second. I'm using the pads, but not the actual LEDs. I'm going to use the LED for the backlight, the tail light, if you will. But the headlights and ditch lights obviously I'm going to use the pads, but not the actual LEDs. So going through this manual, it is important to note, and this might not be the case with every decoder, it might not be the case with every Digitrax decoder. However, you'll want to be sure to check the manual for every installation you do and find out, for instance, this one says specifically, these two headlight functions are current regulated for LEDs or lamps with factory settings of approximately 15 milliamps with no resistors required. And then it explains how to cut there's a trace that you can cut that will increase the headlight current to approximately 30 milliamps. That would be, I would imagine, if you're using like a 12-volt bulb or a larger bulb. The more important part, especially for ditch lights, however, is all 6 functions, blah, blah, blah. No, that's not what I'm looking for. Functions F1 through F4 are full track voltage and can be used by soldering a wire from the pad for the function. So essentially you're getting a full 12 to 14 volts depending on what your DCC system is outputting through those bulbs. So you do not want to send 12 volts through an LED. That'll quickly make it as bright as possible and pew, a lot of smoke. And once the smoke comes out of an electronic component, it's really hard to get back in. You don't want to do that. So you can do some calculations if you want to. It's standard Ohm's law. If you're not familiar with Ohm's law, it's all that voltage, resistance, and current stuff. So basically what I did was I went on to you can just Google 0402 LEDs, or if the manufacturer that you bought them from has specifications. In general, what I found was that the voltage rating for the 0402 LEDs was 2.5 volts. In my opinion, that's a little on the high end. Working with the electrical engineers that I do, we generally dumb things down. You don't run at the highest voltage. You find out where the the luminance is that you want, and then run it below your max voltage. So I shot for more of like a 1.75 to 2 volts instead of 2.5. Increase the longevity, reduce any heat that might build up. I ended up with a 470 ohm quarter watt resistor. Again, your resistance, now LEDs will not activate until they have enough voltage. You can vary the voltage to increase or decrease the brightness. However, you have to reach a certain threshold before the bulb will even come on. Not bulb, but LED. Unlike an incandescent bulb that'll come on with a slight voltage and be very dim, LEDs need enough voltage to arc across. Basically, that's what an LED is. It's just voltage arcing across a small gap, and that creates the light. So you need enough voltage to arc across that. So I went with 470 ohms, and so we'll touch on where I made those wiring connections and how to wire in the LEDs themselves and how to mount the ditch lights and stuff like that. Let's see if I can focus in here a little bit. So the ditch lights locations, when I reference the picture, you can see that they're located on the top of the pilot, near just below the walkway. So I'm going to kind of use that as a gauge, and I'm going to go ahead and mount them just to the left and the right of this lip on the pilot. It won't be perfect, however, the more important part is where you're going to bring the wires in underneath here. And that's really the more critical part, is hiding the wires. You don't want them coming in the footwells of the steps. And I prefer to have the wires come in on either side of these two braces, on either side if I can. There's just a little bit of a narrow pathway you could bring the wires through, or if push came to shove, you could bring them in on the insides of those. For modeling's sake, I'd prefer to do that. Okay, so what I'm going to do, using my pin vise, I've got a small bit in here, just big enough hopefully to fish the wires through, and then I marked 2 holes. I don't know if they'll show up, but I've got 2 holes marked, and I always just use the tip of my X-Acto blade to kind of just, basically I just take it and then kind of just start a hole, and then that'll keep your bit from walking on you and gives you a little bit more accurate hole. And then so I'm going to go ahead and just gently, you got to be very gentle with these drill bits. They're very fragile, and although they're inexpensive, if you break one in the middle of a project, you hate to delay yourself because of a drill bit. Reminded of that SpongeBob, 2 hours later. There we go. And I did. I drilled right through the spine. That's okay. That'll help protect that wire a little bit, and with this, the only downside to this wire, it's very small, it's very thin, somewhat brittle. So if you can protect it by running it inside the plastic, in my opinion, that's even better. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount the LED up top here in the ditch light casting, and then when the wires come out, I will super glue them to the underside of the frame here, and then that'll help protect them when they're in there. If you really want to, what you can do is you could take your X-Acto or even the razor saw and just create basically like a channel in the plastic. Not real deep. Again, these wires are pretty thin, so you could just cut a channel in there, super glue it in, and then that way it's actually below the surface, and it'll mount flush, you know, once you put this back on the frame. I've done that. I don't know if I'll do it here, if it's necessary or not. But alright, I'm going to drill out this other one. It was a long process, so I won't bore you guys with me drilling another hole. Okay, I'm not sure how well this is going to show up, so we'll see what we can do here. So you can see what I did, I got the holes drilled, and you can see this one's sticking out a little bit. It's kind of a, so there's the feeders going through the hole that I drilled, and if we look at the underside, hopefully this is showing up, they just pop out right here. So this is the side that I've already glued in place. So you can see, I don't know if it'll show up, but I put some super glue to hold the wires in place along the frame. I didn't channel it out like I thought I was going to. This should be good. It sits pretty flush. The one thing you want to make sure that you do is give enough slack here where it comes out, so that the wire can come out and not get bent by the frame. repeated bending, if you're removing this, will end up fracturing the wire right there. So you want to make sure that you do that. And then you can see I just mounted the ditch light just with super glue, glued it in place. So I'm going to proceed to do the other one here, and we'll keep moving. Okay, so this is the decoder installed. The ditch lights have been applied. Now, I highly suggest, as you do projects like this, especially with electronics, you test along the way. So I actually put the frame on the actual chassis itself, and you can see the ditch lights are in place, and I went ahead and tested them, and the wires come out underneath the frame, in between the chassis and the frame itself, right here and right here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just route them around this gear tower here, and make sure that they don't bind. Usually try and bring them kind of like straight up. The good news is these wires will hold their form. And then I'll just route them in this area here. Probably just use some electrical tape in this area. Maybe even bind them together with some electrical tape, kind of like tie wraps. And then you can see I went ahead and wrapped the resistors is under here, and the resistors in the front under here. Now, one of the things, and I'll see if you can see through this rat's nest of wires, but I used a common ground for the ditch lights, and you can do this for actually all the lights. Ground is ground. It doesn't matter where it goes back to. The function pads for the LEDs are actually underneath this LED, or underneath this resistor here. These matter, if you want to wire them independently, depending on the railroad that you're modeling. Some have flashing ditch lights when the horn is activated. You could wire them up to the same function. They're low power enough that you won't overdraw the function, so you'd be safe there. You will still want one resistor per LED though, just in case. Don't want to blow them out. And otherwise, here's the stock LED that came with the Kato unit, and I just transplanted it here. Like I said, I'm just going to go with the standard LED for the tail light. And then I put a piece of electrical tape to protect the wires coming out of this truck here, and they run underneath and then up and out here. That keeps them out of the way, and then when I put the light pipe in, I don't have to worry about that. One of the other things that I want to touch on to prevent light bleed, so here's the headlight itself, and this fits perfectly into the holes that I drilled. Kind of got lucky there. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to paint this entire assembly black. Now that the, I don't know if you'll be able to see it or not, but the LED is just glued to the back of this assembly here. And now I'm going to basically almost dip this entire thing in a black paint, and that'll help hide any light bleed from this shooting out. Even though it's nose mounted, you still want to avoid light bleed into the cab and coming out the bottom. It's just going to look unrealistic. You spend all this time making it look nice, and then you have light bleeding out all over the place. So I like to paint this black and then insert it and glue it in place. So I'll do that as well. So for the most part, from here out, I'm just going to be gluing things in place, and a lot of it's just the stock items. So I'm going to apply the stock grab irons that came with, these are just plastic grab irons, so I'll apply those to the pre-drilled Kato holes that they provide. The handrails, of course, that I painted, the MU cables, more handrails and stuff like that, the horn. So the only other thing that I guess I will do that isn't factory is lift rings. And if we look at the top here, there's no okay, this one does have pre-molded in. So if you look right here, there's a little nub there. And so I'm going to have to come with an X-Acto blade and just shave that off as best I can, drill a tiny hole, pop in some real lift rings. Nothing real complicated there. The other thing I'll probably do is using some wire grab irons is that Wisconsin Central oftentimes had one grab iron right here and then another one on the other side, on the underside of the cab right in front of the engineer, which seems kind of odd. And I believe this particular unit had one of those as well. So I'll probably do that. So probably won't video a lot of that stuff because it's pretty cut and dried. If you've ever, you know, put handrails on, put, you know, grab irons on it, nothing real special there. So I think the next view might be a shot of the finished product. Okay, so I kind of fast forwarded a little bit here. I skipped a little bit of what I worked on. However, a lot of what I did here is basic stuff that comes with every Kato model. You know, the handrails, you know, things, the grab irons that, you know, kind of are on there. So nothing out of the ordinary. But you can see what I tried to do is I never got the paint exactly to match on the snow shield, but here it is. And with the weathering, and so what I did for the weathering, I went over it with a light wash, the entire unit with a light wash of all a real watered down white, and that kind of took the sheen off of the factory paint job. And then I came back with a dark skin tone to represent dirt, and I sprayed the trucks with that to give them some highlights. The fuel tank, you know, step wells, walkways and stuff like that, just to give it a, you know, dirt look. And then the roof itself, or the top of the engine itself, to help blend these, I did the same thing. And then finally I came back with some weathered black for the grills, the fans, the exhaust stack here, and again right across like the center line, you know, kind of just to show that the exhaust falling down on top of the engine, depending on which way it's running. So show it from the front here. So you can see I've got the nose mounted headlight on, and put the cab mounted bell and horn in the prototype location. The one thing I forgot to add was a little firecracker antenna that should go right in the center there. I've got to add that in. But then the ditch lights are in, and I mounted the on either side of the drop down walkway are the lift rings. You can see the brake wheel instead of the brake lever as the standard unit came with, and here you can see the grab irons like on top of the nose here, and there's one here. So, and then the white painted steps, the snow plow, and of course the snow shields. On the engineer's side, you know, unfortunately I'm already kind of seeing from handling some of my weathering is coming off. I'm going to have to touch that up. But here's the 3-pane all-weather window. Now, this is one thing that unfortunately I noticed after I glued the window in place. Wisconsin Central actually painted this, so the top half was maroon, and there was a small stripe along the bottom here that matched the cream or the yellow of the engine. We'll see. Maybe I'll come back and hand brush that on. It's going to be kind of hard because this window pane is glued in place now. And then you can see this snow shield in place, and again the grab irons on the nose here, and just some light weathering. Nothing too heavy. This unit was kept pretty clean. All the pictures that I saw until its end, like when CN got it. Once CN got a hold of it, then it kind of went downhill. But during its life with Wisconsin Central, it was kept up pretty well. So that's the completed unit. Well, that's the end of part 2 of the Wisconsin Central SD40 detailing project. I won't call it super detailed, like I said at the beginning of part 1, because my locomotives get a lot of handling, because I got to take stuff on and off the layout. I don't like to go overboard. I'd love to, but then
the models would become too static. I would be afraid to take them on and off, and I like to run this stuff. I hope this encourages you. I took some risks, shaving the nose and taking a chance at lowering the headlight, and I'm really pleased with how it turned out. Is it award-winning? Is it, you know, something that would sell for $1,000 on eBay? No. But you know what? I like it. It's on my layout, and now I've kind of got a unique model. It takes it one step above and beyond the out-of-the-box look, and I hope it encourages you to do the same. Take a look at a model that you've been looking at. Look it up on Railroad Picture Archives or your modeler's prototype website of choice, and see if there's anything unique you can add to an engine. It'll make it stand out, and at least when it rolls past, you'll know that you added a little personal touch to that guy. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you stuck with me. I know this both got kind of long in the tooth a little bit, but this is a long process. I mean, like I said, I started it and waiting for parts to show up, and then you got to wait for things to dry and all that kind of good stuff. But onward and upward, and I'm going to give some thought as to what the next project is. I've been working on this one for so long now, I'm not sure what I'm going to do next. Maybe, I'm not even going to speculate because I'm not really even sure. So, but I'll hopefully get a new video up in short order. So thanks again, everyone. Thanks for subscribing, and we'll see you next time.